Secretary Cox, Dr. Jayam Kannan, our most beloved well-wisher, Dr. Kritika Devi, Treasurer Cox, to the dais. I request Dr. Jaideep Tan for our session, oration, A.R. Chakravarti oration on the topic Modern Obstetrics and How We Got There. Welcome, sir. I request the chairpersons to take over the session.
It's a great honor for us, and the expression of our honor is to adore our orator with Professor A.R. Chakravarti's medal. I request Bhuvaneshwari to hand over the medal to A.R. Chakravarti sir so that we can adore him with the medal and before he starts the oration after our introduction. This society, the first time an oration has started with a decorum of medaling the orator. Where will take it up and proceed further.
Thank you so much, Jay Madam. Thank you, sir. Now, we are going to introduce our beloved President-elect, Dr. Jaideep Tan. May I have the CV? Sir actually needs no introduction. He has been at the high of Foxy for so many years. He has travelled all the steps before reaching this final pinnacle of the President Foxy for the next year. But for he's a very soft-spoken person, a very patient, and he has an ear for everyone's problems. So if I go to him with a problem, he will say, yes, doctor. He will listen it out. And then it will take some time and he will give his view on it. And that is something amazing because you know how things work at various levels. And so I remember him as a secretary of Foxy a few years back. We had gone to him with the issue. And he had very softly handled it so that no one was actually hurt in the process. So I really appreciated the way you handled them, and so you always have a special place in our hearts. So to introduce sir, so you can all of you read that he's a highly commendable person. So he has got so many degrees there, and he is the chair of International Federation of FIGO Committee for Safe Abortion. He is the Deputy Secretary, Asia Oceania, AOFOG, and also he has been awarded the FRC-OG in 2020 by the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, which has been confirmed. And he has had numerous publications to his effect. And he is a consultant in Ashwini Maternity and Surgical Hospital, Center for Laparoscopy and IVF, and he is the co-founder of Esperanza Healthcare Private Limited, Program Director and member of Board Profort IVF, and he is a visiting consultant for more than a dozen IVF centers. A very meticulous person who loves to follow rules. Over to you.
Introduce the orator. With due excuse. Now, the oration is in the name of Professor A.R. Chakravarti. Professor A.R. Chakravarti of Tamil Nadu is Professor B.R. Chakravarti of the Indian Reproductive Medicine father. Everybody knows that he worked with Subhash Mukherjee and the first baby was born, which later on in 1993 it was accepted by the Japanese society. Yes, India produced the first baby. So the first person with a great honor is Professor A.R. Chakravarti. All of you know he is a great academician. But for me, he is a teacher willing to reach A to Z. meaning thereby uterus consists of body of the uterus and cervix. He is also willing to say uterus has distribution anatomically, ultrasonically, the stromal zone and the endometrial line. And he can also teach you in the research way the molecular and nanometric estimation of estrogen and progesterone. That means he can teach you to the first year MBBS, postgraduate and to the PhD. And he has never been a privatization person for obstetric gynec work. I hope all of you understand what I mean by that. And we are talking so much about Badlao. That Badlao, he has done it free of cost. He says, social economic project for women. The project is when to change the woman. Can he change it at the adolescent, reproductive age, or after that is what is free work he is doing. Of course, he has been a doctor in the primary health center, district hospital, professor, dean, senate member, and he has been a member of the Oxy for the past 30 years. And after that, he took to himself, yes, I will do something for the place where I have worked, that is Chengalpet, with Chengalpet as a base, Kanjivaram as a district, with Umaya, he started the Obstetric Gynec Society at Kanjivaram, so that this society is now in its infancy. Above all, I don't think any of us have done. He has his own private blood bank called SR Blood Bank, which gives blood freely to the deserving required person. So somebody comes and gives, but to organize and give is the one. I think Jaideep Tank should be greatly obliged, and I feel emotional to invite you to talk the oration made in the name of Professor A.R. Chakravarti. Over to you, Jaideep.
Thank you very much, Jaya Madam, for those wonderful words. It's such a pleasure and privilege to be here. And you know, it's a great responsibility to deliver an oration. The oration is typically the scientific highlight of the conference. And there is always a little bit of anxiety for the speaker. But after what Dr. Jayam Kadan Madam has said, my anxiety has grown quite a lot. It is a privilege and a pleasure to deliver this oration in the name of one of the most eminent Foxy members, Dr. Chakravarti sir. Thank you very much, sir, for awarding this oration to me. Thank you very much, Umair, for inviting me and making me a part. And I'm going to show you something in the next slide. And of course, Dr. Devi, the chairperson, and all the seniors who are here. I can see there are many of my friends over here. When I took my first office bearer's post in Foxy, which at that time there was no joint treasurer, so I became treasurer directly. Dr. Jayam Kadan Madam was the first person to phone me that, are you going for treasurer? So I said, yes madam, I am going for treasurer. She said, very good, because I have already sent your name without you asking me. So thank you very much madam for all the wonderful support, guidance and advice over the years. There are some who are here who are going to stand for the Foxy elections, which are just around the corner. Sadhna ji, Jyoti, and everyone else, Tushar, Meg Madam. I wish you all the best, Sadhna ji, for these elections. And of course, my good friend Bhaskar is here. And someone who's a very special person for me, Charmila, is going to be the president of the South Zone. And I must say, Charmila, I am feeling very happy and lucky to have you as my vice president. And of course, there are so many other stalwarts Madam is there, Dr. Revati, Dr. Ramani Devi Madam, and so many seniors. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I must say that it's even more of a pleasure because I removed these pictures yesterday. This was the first physical conference I attended after COVID, and Umair had done such a wonderful job. And I must tell you, Umair, these pictures are very special for me for many reasons. And one of the important reasons is this is the only conference in my entire lifetime which I have attended on my birthday. And you can see the society had kindly arranged a cake for me to cut, and I must say I was so obliged. It was such a kind gesture. I must thank you very much. You can see in that photo below we are all wearing masks, and it's nice to see everybody without a mask. And Charmila, you had sent me these photos, so I went back to our WhatsApp chat and got them. So I'm going to speak on modern obstetrics and how we got there. But this is not a talk on the history of obstetrics. So for example, I'm not going to tell you about how we developed the forceps or the history of cesarean section or anything. What we are going to talk about, in fact, is what drives us to practice obstetrics in this modern era the way that we do. And let me start with this slide. I think a lot of what is said and what is done in modern obstetrics is unfortunately not led by obstetricians. We have been guided, sometimes coerced, into the way of practicing modern obstetrics by people who may not necessarily have delivered even a single baby in their life. I attend a lot of these meetings and I'm always astonished about their confidence. It's like over here, let me interrupt your expertise, which is our expertise, with my confidence. And I often feel that I should tell them that, if you have never stood next to a woman with a fetal heart which is dropping to 60, if you have never stood in front of a perineum with blood gushing out in torrents from the uterus, if you never held a flabby uterus and prayed to God that this uterus contracts quite immediately, really, at least listen to what we have to say. Unfortunately, a lot of what we do in modern obstetrics is a tale of narratives. Just think about it. And there are various types of narratives. Let me explain what I mean by narratives. There is this narrative, for example, that doctors do too many cesarean sections. Doctors do too many hysterectomies. Doctors charge too much for their services. But there is another set of narratives which we haven't, I think, paid attention to, and that is the narrative which we share with our patients. As obstetricians, we are looking after women in perhaps one of the most vulnerable times in their lives. They are therefore always seeking reassurance, and because obstetricians are generally kind-hearted, we keep on constantly providing that reassurance. But this comes with a problem. It comes with a problem because when things go wrong, and in obstetrics things will invariably go wrong in a few situations, it creates an issue. Let me give you an example. You are sitting in your clinic and you have this lady, 32 years old. She's come to you with her ultrasound report. She's 32 weeks pregnant. She and her relatives are sitting in front of you. You are looking at the sonography report and you say, well, you are diabetic, you are hypertensive, The ultrasound report shows that your child has severe IUGR, there's oligoamnios, and there are Doppler changes. So the relatives and patients looking at you like that, and what do you think they'll say? Most of the times they'll say, but everything else is okay, no? I'm sure all of you had this experience. And then what do you say? In your mind you are thinking, isn't this enough? But obviously you cannot say that. So you say yes, everything else is okay. And this is the problem. Because when things go wrong in the labor room, typically there is no time to explain to the patient what has happened. Take the example of shoulder dystocia. Take the example of severe PPH. There's no time to go out and explain to the patient what happened. So you do what needs to be done, and then you go out and tell the patient and her relatives rather that this happened, I did this, and now this is what you can expect. And typically the relatives will tell you, doctor, but till now you were saying everything is normal. Then how this happened? And that is why I think that although we want to reassure patients, we must tinge this reassurance with a hint of reality, which I admit is a very thin line. You don't want the patient going through 9 months of pregnancy scared of what will happen in labor and delivery, but you also don't want a patient and her relatives to be unprepared for any eventuality. So it's a thin and difficult line to walk, but I think in modern obstetrics we have to walk it. And that's why I like this quote from Marsden Wagner, who wrote in the Lancet, nowhere is maternal mortality or perinatal mortality zero, and throughout history women have accepted this harsh reality until recently. And she wrote doctors because she was a midwife, but I would say now the entire healthcare ecosystem, starting from the promise of plush LDRP rooms with tinkling waterfalls and soft candles and music and so on and so forth, began to promise perfection. Now when something goes wrong, women and families feel deceived and seek answers. So in modern day obstetrics, reassurance by all means, but tinged with a hint of reality. You know, if you do a Google search, this is a Google search I did recently on childbirth. You can try it on your own phones just now. But then do only the search and stop, don't go to your WhatsApp. If you do a Google search for childbirth, look at the number of results you get. 69,800,000 results. Imagine the amount of information that is out there for anybody who's on the internet. And most of our patients now will be on the internet. How is it possible for patients to analyze, go through, sift, and finally conclude which information is useful for them and which information is not? In fact, one of the major problems is the lack of authentic information on the internet. And that is why patients, and sometimes even we, tend to think that human childbirth is extremely complex. And in a way, if you compare it to mammalian birth, it is complex. But then why is human childbirth complex? It's complex because the process of human childbirth is actually a solution to an evolutionary problem. Unlike other mammals who walk on 4 legs, we walk on 2 legs. And because we walk on 2 legs, we need a small and fixed bony pelvis. But our heads are large because although you may not think so, most of us have large brains. So the problem is, how do you fit this large head through that small pelvis? And the way it happens is through a series of intricate maneuvers. I'm sure all of you have read Ox on Foot, and you will remember the mechanism of labor diagrams. So part of the solution is that in a sense all human mothers actually give birth prematurely. Compare a human birth and the human baby at birth with the babies of mammals. I'm sure you all have seen videos on Discovery Channel of something of a calf being born or an elephant calf being born. Typically the mammal will go into a corner of a jungle somewhere, push the whole fetus out or the child out, uncoil, and then the child itself will break the membranes and come out. Our neonates of course can't do that because they are born prematurely. And because this is a complex process, modern obstetrics centers around training. If you look at the history of our science, you will see that although obstetrics is as old as the millennia, formally speaking, it was the 17th century that male midwives started becoming fashionable in France and then slowly spread to Britain. In fact, the first ever school of midwifery was established in Britain in 1725, and the first chair of midwifery was in Edinburgh just 1 year later. So compared to other sciences, our science is relatively new. In 1739, William Smellie of the Marcio Smellie White Maneuver for Breech started the first private midwifery course. And his advertisement stated that a 2-year course of lectures cost 20 guineas, which nowadays is around 2,000 rupees. My son is in medicine, I wish the fees were still that much. The British College, which was the first formal association of obstetricians and gynecologists, was established in 1928. So once associations started forming, the science of obstetrics started acquiring a more formal look. But what really changed things in obstetrics, in fact, was the Aval score. And my wife, who is a pediatrician, is fond of telling me, when I present this slide, that your obstetrics changed because of a pediatrician. Because when you had the Aval score, it turned this intangible and bit of an impressionistic clinical concept, which was the condition of a newly born baby, into a number or an industry. Because if it's an industry with an assembly line kind of an approach, then outcome should be uniform for everybody. But if it is a craft, how to apply the forceps, how to deliver the breech, then outcomes will be different. But this has to be accepted, that you will not always have good outcomes both in the mother and the newborn. So people started looking to keep on having better and better scores, and the answer they found was the cesarean section. And that's really how cesarean sections started getting prominence in modern obstetrics. Cesarean sections did not come about because it was convenient. It did not come about, or the increase in C-sections, because doctors wanted to make more money. It came about because doctors wanted to give better and better outcomes to the mother. In fact, this is a key narrative that has not been established, which led to someone like Barbara Harper saying, we used to see birth as a miracle and only mess with it if there's a problem. Now, we see birth as a problem, and if we don't mess with it, it's a miracle. Which sounds actually very funny, but at the back of it, there's a very insidious kind of a feeling that we are doing too much. This also comes about because as obstetricians and gynecologists, if you looked at this old ranking, obstetricians came in last for evidence-based medicine. And you know, if you really think about it, it's true. We have so many papers written in so many journals, but think of the basic things that we do. How many randomized controlled trials were done before we started applying forceps in routine practice? 0. How many randomized controlled trials were done before we started adopting the admission test as routine practice? Again, the answer is 0. And therefore, because the evidence behind a lot of our interventions was a little sketchy, people started doubting the interventions that we were making. Even other specialties started doubting the interventions that we were making. But what is true is that outcomes have improved. If you look at India's maternal mortality, for example, it is the lowest that it has ever been in our recorded history. So you may say that there is not enough evidence, but the fact is that as obstetricians and gynecologists delivering women in this country, we sometimes need to take a step back and give ourselves a pat on the back. Because it's because of us that fewer women are dying every year. So finally, what is modern obstetric practice? It is, of course, pre-pregnancy planning, antenatal care, delivery and post-delivery care, but it's so much more than that. In terms of narratives, it's also this whole thing called natural birth. Again, a term I have never understood. How can a birth be unnatural? A birth is a birth. You can't have an unnatural birth. So obviously, all births are by definition natural. The demand for zero risk, coping with poor infrastructure, the medico-legal implications, and of course, famous Google aunt or uncle, depending on which gender you are referring to, of too much information. And all this has led to two major issues in modern obstetrics. And those issues are the issues of cesarean rates and what I like to call the over-preciousness surrounding motherhood. And because the narratives which drive these two issues also drive the way we practice modern obstetrics, it's worth talking about both of them. So let me first focus on cesarean rates. And these are the talking points. The controversy actually started with this paper from the WHO in 1985, which quite explicitly said that there is no justification for any reason to have CS rates higher than 10 to 15%. And everything since then which has been written on cesarean rates has been based on this one paper. And that's why it's very important to look at the literature since this paper was published and ask the question, is this paper right? Because if you look at global cesarean rates, you will see that there are only 3 countries in the world marked in green over there, where section rates are between 10 and 15%. In any country which has a desirable maternal mortality rate, the rates are considerably higher. You'll see most of them are actually between 35 and 45%. But this 10 to 15% has become embedded in the minds of activists, policymakers, and sometimes even politicians, which has resulted in petitions like this: safeguard delivery, normal delivery, anti-cesarean. When I read this, I thought, what is nuchal thickness cesarean? And then I realized that he forgot to add the O. And then of course that other one, normal delivery is forgotten, cesarean is only option for ladies. What I would like to point out here is, please see the number of supporters. This one got 20 supporters here. And if you see this one, it got 7 supporters, and they had to close the petition because there was no support, which meant the community did not resonate with the community, these kind of petitions. But then these petitions came out. This was a petition led by Mrs. Ghosh. And I don't know whether you read this petition, but it makes for very interesting reading. A new Karan Johar movie has just come out, Rocky or Rani Ki Prem Kahani. And if you read this petition, it's like a Karan Johar movie. There was that famous dialogue, इसमें drama है, tragedy है, emotion है, comedy है. This petition. If you read this petition and see how she's written it, I was cut open to deliver my baby. Because I wanted to have a natural birth, but my choice was overridden. No mention of the fact that she and the baby are fine. But see the difference. Look at the number of supporters she got. 1,80,346 and still counting. And a lot of newspapers and all were very quick to pick this up. She focused, Mrs. Ghosh focused on 10 to 15% as the optimal rate for C-sections. Newspapers said that it's a racket. They called us profiteering. And some newspapers asked for a smarter healthcare policy. All saying that our section rate should be 10 to 15%. This is based on that 1985 paper. And I don't know whether you know, we studied 3 laws of Newton in school, but there's actually a 4th very important law. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction plus a social media overreaction. And in a classic case of social media overreaction, Shri Menuka Gandhi ji, who was then the Minister for Women's Health or NCW, I think, she said, doctors who do too many cesareans should be named and shamed, and our C-section rate should be higher than 10 to 15%. In response to this, the government of Maharashtra issued this circular saying that we need to now regulate C-sections in the private sector. I was the Secretary General at that time, and I was called for a meeting where they said, let's draw up regulations for the private sector. I'll tell you what happened in the meeting. But now you will agree that 10 to 15% needs to be looked at very seriously. What is almost always overlooked, and this is from one of the persons who was the author of that 1985 paper, is that the WHO document reflected a correlation only with mortality. That C-section rate did not take into account morbidity at all. Why did they not take into account morbidity? Because there is no data available on morbidity. In fact, none of the countries with a stillbirth rate of 2 to 4 per thousand, which is the recommended stillbirth rate, have a section rate between 10 and 15%. They are all more than 40% at a population level. And there are so many problems with this 10 to 15%. For example, the studies on which this recommendation was based were limited by either having incomplete data or relied on average cesarean delivery rates. The methodology was not robust, and most importantly, the rates were never meant to assess cesareans at the level of an individual facility, physician or patient. These CS rates are meant to help policymakers to decide where cesareans are not available and then make them available. In fact, if you look at this study from the Ariadne Labs group, they said that the previously recommended national targets for cesarean deliveries may actually be too low. And only for mortality, instead of 10 to 15%, they are recommending 19%. So essentially, it's a problem of inadequate data. Because this 10 to 15% or anything else does not take into account morbidities like vesicovaginal fistula, neonatal hypoxia, stillbirth, or any other form of morbidity. Why doesn't it take it into account? There is no data at the population level. We have data on mortality, but we have no data on morbidity. In fact, even if you look at our Indian data, and this is from the NFHS4, so this is not Foxy data or a private study, this is government mandated data. And even if you look at this, as per the 15-16 NFHS, the cesarean rates at a population level in India are only 17.2%. They make a distinction and say that cesarean rates in private sector are higher than cesarean rates in public sector. But they did not look into the background of saying that in places where cesarean rates are higher in the private sector, our cesarean rate is cesarean available in the public sector. Are section rates in the private sector higher because all patients from public sector are coming over there? No mention of that. In fact, if you look at the district-wise map of India and the data from the district-wise map, you will see, and I am not being political here, that most of the country is orange. What does it mean? It means that most of the country actually has too few cesarean sections. And that's why our mortality is not coming down with the speed with which it should. In fact, if you read the newspaper, you'll think that every obstetrician has 80% section rate. But more than 50% section rate actually exists only in these very few districts which are marked in black. There are hardly any districts where on a population level section rates are more than 50%. In fact, those districts happen to be in Telangana. And if you look at the data again, you'll see that delivery by C-section at private health institutions totally is 42%. It's nowhere close to what these newspapers keep on talking about, saying that it's 80% and 90%. In fact, when the NFHS 5 data came out, it showed that in West Bengal, Bhaskar, births in a private health facility were 80.2%. What was the fallacy? And this is the importance of reading these documents. They arrived at this conclusion by surveying 0.1% of all the households in West Bengal and extrapolated those findings to the entire state. So what is to say that the sample that they surveyed was somehow not biased. And in fact, when this happened, as expected, the newspaper started, again I was Secretary General, so they started calling me up and asking me that, why do you think there is such a high rate? And then I pointed this out to them. So I took the screenshot from the document and I sent it to all the reporters. And as I told you, information was gathered from 18,000 households, which is less than 0.1% of the population. And therefore, the time, ladies and gentlemen, has come to put the debate about the preferable rate of CS on hold. In fact, the WHO, perhaps they realized the damage which their statement has done. And when they updated their statement on CS rates, see the headline. This is the headline of the WHO document. Every effort should be made to provide cesarean sections to women in need, rather than striving to achieve a specific rate. So to answer the question, is there a recommended rate for C-section? The short answer is no. And the WHO says so. It's not me or Foxy or anybody else saying so. So what do you make of all this petitions and articles in the newspaper and all? And mind you, these petitions and articles have been written after the WHO statement which said that there should not be specific rate for cesarean came out. For me, they are just column inches, ill-informed at best and malicious at worst. In fact, one enterprising lawyer took a case to the Supreme Court and he told the Supreme Court that Supreme Court must frame guidelines on how doctors will do C-sections. So it's very interesting to read this order. And the Foxy lawyer who represented us in other cases in the Supreme Court was there, so he sent this order to me. The judge fortunately dismissed the petition and he penalized the person who had petitioned 25,000 rupees for wasting the court's time. And I believe a lot of this has happened from the advocacy which Foxy has done. You know, this is not something which affects us only. It affects patients. Because what is happening indirectly is that cesarean sections are getting stigmatized. They are being seen as something which is done not out of necessity or in the best interest of the mother and child. And look at this headline is from Tamil Nadu. I believe this gentleman's wife was a second para. She had a first normal delivery and he thought, well, this is really easy. The wife went in 2-3 hours, she delivered. She said, so now next time I will only deliver her. I will learn from YouTube videos how to deliver and I will deliver her. So when she went into labor, they didn't go to the hospital. He opened YouTube, started learning how to deliver. Unfortunately, there was obstructed labor. He still didn't go to the hospital, and by the time he reached the hospital, both the mother and the child had died. And this is worrisome. And this is not something which is happening only in India. That's an article from China, that's an article from the UK, where women are refusing C-sections or their relatives are refusing them to undergo C-sections because of all the stigmatization which occurs. And this stigmatization occurs because of wanton and unnecessary reporting. For example, look at that headline. This is on the front page of that newspaper. Private hospitals will need government nod for C-section. Simply not true. What happened at that time was that Ayushman Bharat started. And when Ayushman Bharat started, the government said that if there is no facility to do a cesarean in that public sector facility, that patient will be referred to an empaneled private sector along with a note stating the indication for the C-section. And it was misinterpreted as saying private hospitals will need a nod. That's why I had tweeted, rhetoric has replaced sometimes even dangerously what is best for the woman, her baby and the family, and a rational evidence-based approach to this issue is vital rather than the lazy narrative of the commercialization of medicine in general and birthing in particular. In fact, if you think about it, the entire argument on cesareans versus vaginal delivery, and it should not be an argument, they should be complementary to each other, but unfortunately it's an argument, stands on two pillars. One, that cesarean sections have more mortality and morbidity compared to vaginal deliveries. People forget that a lot of the data on which this pillar is based is old data. It's not from modern obstetrics. I'm sure all of you do C-sections. I want you to think back on the last time, unless you are in a medical college or a tertiary hospital, when was the complication which occurred because you did a C-section? See, the background risk is different. You do a C-section for a PIH, diabetic, big baby and so on. She's going to have a complication irrespective of whether it's a C-section or a vaginal delivery. Look at this meta-analysis. And again, not a new one, it's from 2014 from the UK, from St. Bart's Hospital. And look at the conclusion of this meta-analysis. In equivalent groups, in the modern day, there is no difference in mortality and morbidity from C-sections and vaginal deliveries. And then of course, what about reproductive autonomy? We say that the woman should have the freedom to choose. And we emphasize this when it comes to sexual and reproductive health. When we talk about contraception, when we talk about abortion, when we talk about bodily autonomy, we said she should have the right to choose. But if the woman chooses to have a cesarean section and she tells you tomorrow that I want to have a C-section, just think to yourself, will you not try and tell her, but why not vaginal? It is incumbent upon you to explain to her the pros and cons of C-sections versus vaginal deliveries. But do we tell the patient that in a vaginal delivery you could have a fistula, you could have a perineal tear, you could have an obstetric anal sphincter injury which could lead to fecal and fetal incontinence? You could have shoulder dystocia. No. Do we take consent for vaginal delivery? We don't. Most of the times we don't. That is what causes issues. And I can see that the pendulum is now swinging back. This is from the UK. And there was a hospital where an inquiry was instituted because the staff, including the midwives there, wanted normal deliveries at any cost. And look at the language, that baby skulls were fractured and bones were broken. In fact, the Shrewsbury maternity scandal finally led to a very, very big scandal. And this lady said there's no such thing as a normal birth. Every birth experience is different. And there is currently an investigation going on into a Nottingham hospital which pursued a policy of vaginal delivery at any cost. See, that top midwife says sorry for lives lost. And in fact, coming back to the narrative part of the discussion that I began with, one of the challenges with changing societal narratives is how any health message is conveyed. The term normal birth carries with it a value judgment. That means if you have a cesarean birth, you are having an abnormal birth. So we may not say it, but that is what is conveyed. And therefore, one of the first things that we will do in the next year when I am the Foxy president is come out with a statement saying that please abandon the use of the word normal. It is either a vaginal birth or it is a cesarean birth. There is nothing normal or abnormal. And I hope that we will come out with this statement in January. In fact, if you have not read, then I would strongly urge you to read the statement on cesarean rates. I had the great privilege of drafting it for Foxy and then taking inputs from the managing committee. And a lot of what I have said today is reflected in this statement. So what's the way forward? We need to start collecting data to identify which patients are most at risk of cesareans and then try and optimize cesarean rates. Please do not use the word reduce cesarean rates. It's wrong. We want to optimize because in our country there are places where there are too few cesareans. And if we don't provide cesareans, it creates a problem. So in brief, there is no doubt that cesareans where medically indicated save lives. There is inadequate data and it is perhaps impossible to determine optimal rates at a facility, physician or individual level. So this is the way forward and this is work that we are going to do. We have been talking to USAID for a long time. I'm supposed to have a meeting with them next week and hopefully we will get a grant to pursue this in the next year. So what happened in the meeting that I told you we attended with the government of Maharashtra? After we went for the meeting, they gave me an opportunity. I made the same presentation to them. And when we made the presentation, they finally said, you see my name and Dr. Meg's name. So I went for one meeting with Dr. Meg, another meeting with Dr. Nandita. They said that let Foxy collect the data. And they said no regulations for now. Let the data come, let's analyze the data and then see whether regulations are required. Which brings me to my next and last portion of the presentation, which is what I like to call the over-preciousness surrounding motherhood. And I think this is really a very, very important thing. It's a very important thing because it speaks to the experience which modern women have while giving birth. You know, I've been delivering babies for more than 3 decades. I do a lot of IVF, but I must admit, I love obstetrics. I will never give up obstetrics. What change I have seen in the last few years is that our women are under incredible pressure in the pregnancy. Incredible pressure. And the pressure is to deliver the perfect outcome. 3.5 kilo baby with a vaginal delivery with the baby coming first in 10th standard. Starting from all the WhatsApp messages which these women get, think happy thoughts. Don't be stressed. Arey, who will get reduced stress by telling them not to get stressed? And I'm telling you, this has become a real problem. You know, I had this patient, and every time she came, she would come with her husband, father-in-law, mother-in-law, father, mother, and sister-in-law. Every time she came for an antenatal visit, I had to ask for extra chairs in my consulting room. I vomited 3 times. But my sister-in-law vomited 6 times. Does it mean her pregnancy is better than mine? Just imagine what this poor girl is going through. And I'm sure all of you have had these experiences. Women are feeling pressure. So instead of enjoying their pregnancy, they are worried about what will happen. And you know what they say, everybody becomes an expert when you are pregnant. Even if you go to Starbucks and order a coffee, the barista will tell you, are you sure you can have a coffee? You are pregnant. And that's why I think, again, the narrative. This narrative, personal between us and the patient, needs to be realistic as well as reassuring. I'm ending, I think my time's up, but I have the last 2 slides. So let me end by this statement, that in modern obstetrics, the hallmark of labor management should be individualized care for the laboring woman, with the expectation of a safe and successful vaginal delivery, together with the ability to intervene with a cesarean delivery if needed to prevent morbidity and mortality. After all, we want to look forward with hope and not backwards with regret, because at the end of the day, history is her story too. Thank you very much.
That was totally an excellent and enlightening oration, sir. We are extremely honored and privileged to have you here as an orator. Modern obstetrics and how we got. You just spoke our minds, sir. Lot of grievances, young OGs, they are not willing to take up obstetrics nowadays because of the social media overreaction. And remove that word normal delivery is absolutely needed, sir. Please do the needful. Thank you so much for having you here, sir.
Actually, it will go a long way in promoting our younger generation to practice obstetrics. Because now people are going away from obstetrics because of the present scenarios.
Thank you, sir. I request Dr. Chakravarti sir to announce shawl to Dr. J.D. Tan. The floor to be brought to the dais by
super specialties are there.
I request ma'am to read the flower.
Hello. It's a great privilege for us. Kanchipuram Obstetrics and Gynecological Society. It gives us immense pleasure in honoring Dr. J.D. Tank for delivering the Professor A.R. Chakravarti oration at Aval International and National Conclave on 29th of July, signed by the office bearers Dr. Chakravarti, Dr. Umaya Burgesan and Dr. Kirtika Devi.
I request Dr. Kritika Devi ma'am to give the memento to Jayanti Kissan.
Any more office members are here? Executive team, please join for a lovely photograph with Jaydeep Khan, who has rendered such a great oration. Probably all of you who are in this uniform saree, maybe that is the organizing team. All uniform sarees, please be there.